Good evening, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of the sheep management class for the Small Farms program at Cornell. Lynn is here as well, and this is Betsy Hodge. So several of you have sent us really nice notes. I really appreciate that. It's a lot of work to get the class together, and it's nice to know that you're finding the information useful. And I keep thinking how great it would be if we could all get together someday, or all get together and visit some of each other's farms, because you guys are in so many interesting places. So when I retire, watch out, I might come on a road trip and visit everybody. So tonight, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty here, talk about business planning and money. And I got to say, the animals are my favorite part of having a sheep business, but I don't really want to lose too much money or make too much money, or, that isn't my priority, but it is important, and it is important to keep track of. So we're going to talk a little bit about general business planning, and then I'm going to switch and do another PowerPoint that is more on like the cost of production and how to keep track of that. So this was put together by Kelsey O'Shea. Kelsey was our regional ag business management specialist in Northern New York, and is married to a large dairy farmer. No, a farmer with a large dairy. That would be a better way to say it. So let's talk about, where do you start? You need to think about why you're in the business and what's most important to you. Like, is this a project for the kids? Is this something you've always wanted to do? Do you really like pasturing, and so you're going to use sheep to pasture your land? Do you just really enjoy working with the animals? Think about why you're doing this. And if you read the case studies that I left in the homework, you'll see there's lots of different reasons why people get into the sheep business. And it's important to keep that in mind. And your purpose may change as you go along. That's okay. But think about why you're doing it now. And then decide on your goals that'll serve that purpose. And we'll talk about how to set good goals. Excuse me. And we'll lay out a plan to achieve those goals, and try to create a timeline to do all that stuff so it happens. So why did you start this business anyways? And I love Kelsey's little chart there, because you love it, the world needs it, you're paid for it, or you're really good at it, and all those things overlap. Hopefully you're in the sweet spot in the middle there somewhere, right? For fun, I love the animals, to provide a safe local product, to help supplement my income. Any of those or all of them. Maybe you have a totally different reason. Maybe you need to do something with your kids, and that's something you can do together. Anyway, think about why you want to start. If you haven't started, why you want to start, and if you did start it, why you started your business. And what will your goals be? It's a good idea to write some down. You don't have to do it right this minute, but think about writing some down. They can be short-term goals or long-term goals, but they should be SMART goals. That means they're pretty specific, they're measurable, achievable, realistic, which is kind of like achievable, and time-bound. In other words, you need to put a deadline on them. So, for example, here's a few I came up with. Get the perimeter fence up by the end of the summer. Who knows when the end of the summer is exactly, right? But that still has a little bit of a time on the end. Look at possible flocks for herd sire by June, right before they sell all the lambs and there aren't any left. Get my farm taxes done by April 15th. Yes, I thought I was going to do all my taxes and have them ready this past weekend, and then our sheep decided to lamb when it was -20, and that didn't happen. Increase our lambing percentage to 1.5 by 2020. Well, maybe 2021 or 2022. You get the idea. Get the ram pen pitched out before summer. Okay, that's a fairly obvious one, easy. Direct market 20 lambs in 2021. So maybe you decided that you could make more money direct marketing lambs, and so you're going to increase the number you sell next year or whenever. And that is actually a picture of our extension sheep grazing all over the place, because we sort of use them for doing cleanup. Then you want to make a list of things to get done. Big things like make a business plan, and little things, write some goals, prioritize your list, think about who's going to do it and when you need to coordinate with another person. Like you might always be the person on the list. Sometimes you're going to need help, or you might realize there's other people that can do some of the jobs, right? Isn't it one of the most important business principles is to do the things you're good at and pay somebody else to do the rest? Plan ahead, especially when you're figuring out when to lamb, or have a plan B and C and D. Hopefully you won't need a plan Z, but I think sometimes that's one of the hardest things for people that haven't been farming before. I work with a lot of retired military guys because we're right near Fort Drum, which is a big military installation in northern New York, and they're great to work with. They're interested in new ideas. They usually have some money to spend. They're young, they're ambitious, but they are used to things going according to plan, and they always have a hard time because farming doesn't always go as planned. Almost never goes as planned, as a matter of fact. So you have to teach them to have a plan B and a plan C, and not be upset, but just go to the next plan or try something different. And now you also need to think about who's going to steer the ship. Who's the boss? Sometimes it's the person that put the most money in, as it was with my partner that worked with me for a while. He was a young fella and he didn't have much cash. He had sweat equity, but I was doing all the investing, so I got to make most of the decisions. Who's going to do the actual farming, like do the chores and that sort of thing? Who's maybe there's somebody who's good at the marketing side in your family or in your group of people running the farm, who likes to talk to people, who likes to do artwork, or not necessarily artwork, but graphic arts like designing an ad or a pamphlet. Who's going to manage the money? You can't just forget about the money. It's a good idea to at least attempt to manage it. Who's going to manage the record keeping? And boy, it's easy to get behind in record keeping. I can attest to that. And then it's hard to catch up, but it's great when you do. Who's going to be the captain? Make the final decision, direct the rest of the help. And don't forget things like who's going to make dinner or who's going to get the kids from swim practice, because you can't let those things go either. People like to eat, and your kids don't like getting left at school and then having to make excuses for you. So make sure everybody's on the same page and you don't forget about things in the house. And as a matter of fact, I can think of 2 instances where people dove into farming a little too fast, a little too hard, and ended up getting out, or they were going to lose their family. So include your family, make sure everybody's on the same page. So there's lots of parts of a business plan, like where it's located, who it is, the date, maybe the name of your business as well, right? You might have a fancy name. We were Double H Sheep for Hayes and Hodge. What's your vision, your mission? And I'm not always sure the difference between the vision and the mission, but a big overall statement of what you're trying to do, and then some goals, a production plan, a marketing plan, which I think is even more important. And then you're going to do some cash flow budgets, maybe projecting out a couple of years. And you're estimating, we realize that, but it does, if you're going to go ask for a loan or a line of credit, it's very impressive to the banker to plop this business plan on their desk. They probably know nothing about sheep. And so you could put almost anything in there, but at least it looks like you've sat down, thought it through, and have an idea where you're headed. Our goal was to have 1,000 sheep in, I think it was 5 years, and we had a whole cash flow plan to get there. Unfortunately, he took another job in another place, and I'm back to 30 sheep, but it was nice to have that plan and allowed us to get a line of credit. Now at the bottom is a website that has some examples of farm business plans and some different templates you can use. I had used to be at the Small Farm site, and now seems to be at the beginningfarmers.org site. And in your business plan, you want to do a little organizational chart and sort of divide things up by what people want to do and what they're good at. And then, like I mentioned before, are there things you can pay someone else to do? Maybe you want someone else to do your taxes, for example. I pay somebody to clean out my barn because I don't have any equipment and they're really good at it, and I'd probably knock things over if I got in a skid steer. And do you have niches an intern could fill or a part-time help? I'm not talking about a volunteer intern. I'm talking about an actual intern from a college that maybe could learn a skill and help you out at the same time. Maybe they have computer skills that you don't have, for example. They know how to use Instagram, that sort of thing. And then think about what makes financial sense. What capital investment is needed? Like you're talking about, do you need a building? Do you need fencing? Capital investments are the money you put in at the beginning. Usually it's for big things. Do you need equipment? And then you need to really think hard about what size you should be. And we will talk more about this under cost of production, but you don't want to be bigger than the land you have, unless there's readily available rental land, that sort of thing. You want to be too big to start out with. It's a fine line between big enough to afford, say, some equipment versus starting small. Might be able to start by, running the sheep in and out of the machine shed, the backside of the machine shed, until you get going, and then could build a real sheep barn. Or maybe it's more efficient to build the big sheep barn and be efficient and have more sheep and therefore have more income. You need to really sit down and think about these things. And when is it time to expand? Or maybe you need to get smaller. Depends on your situation and your family, your age, the help you have, all that sort of thing. And then what is the timeline? And I'd like to say that's a view from my house, but it's not. I'm not sure where that is. Good chance it's the Adirondacks, though. So let's talk a little bit about business structure. Based on your goals, what should your structure be? So I was a sole proprietorship. Actually, we had two of us on there, but it was basically a sole proprietorship. It's simple. There's no separate tax forms. There's no additional liability protection, like your business is not a separate entity. So things that happen to the business happen to you. You can still be a tax exempt, sales tax exempt business, and you still need to file a Schedule F, which is the farm form for the United States, Treasury, for the IRS, or Schedule C, which is a small business form. There are limited options for business transfer, like you can't have people already involved in the business that you're solely giving the business to, or it's trickier. So some people do an LLC or a partnership. Some people even do an S Corp and other more advanced corporations, especially big farms. They're still a family farm, but they have different generations and members of the family sort of on the board and in ownership of the business. An LLC is not that hard to set up, although you do need a lawyer to set it up for you. Although I think our local accountants do it for people. They must have an attorney they work with. It does provide a layer of liability protection. It does require slightly different tax forms. It can still be tax exempt. It does allow for multiple owners, and it allows for more options for business transfer. So think about what you want to start, and you should get a business checking account. And there's lots of free checking accounts, free business checking accounts. I had one that I was paying all these weird charges for, switched to another bank and have one for free. So look around a little bit. And then in New York State, at least, you want to do what we call a DBA, or a doing business as. It's basically a sheet of paper you fill out and sign. It's probably a charge. It was like $30, I think. And they do a search around the state, see if there's any other business with that name. And then they issue you a DBA, doing business as. So we were doing business as Double H Sheep Company. You can be your own name, you can call it whatever you want. But then you're a registered business, and that way, when you want to get a business checking account, you can say, I have a DBA, and they'll let you have a business account. Also helps when you're filing your Schedule F. So tax returns. If you are indeed treating this as a business, you should be filing income and expenses on your tax return, right? So that means you got to keep them separate from your household stuff. So I have my business account, and I have a debit card, and I try to use that. Occasionally I forget, but I try to use that when I'm doing any business transactions. And that way it's all in that account. Looks like a separate account. It is a separate account. And then I use my personal one for my own things. And it's a little tricky when I go to the feed store and I'm buying stuff for my house dogs and cats and then stuff for animals in the barn. And I have to check out twice, which people behind me don't appreciate, but it does help keep your books clean. And I use Quicken. A lot of people use QuickBooks. You can still use an account book. They're hard to get. You almost have to order them on Amazon now. You used to be able to get them at the drugstore. But an account book, you can use a spiral notebook, which you make columns with a ruler. But you can just want to keep track of the different categories of expenditures you have. I mentioned the separate bank account with a debit card. So the IRS categorizes a hobby as a business that has no intentions to actually make a profit. So you have to look like you're trying to make a profit, and I'm sure most of you are trying to make a profit. You might not make a profit, but that doesn't disqualify you as long as you can show what you're doing. Like when I was expanding my flock and was growing in assets, but my cash income wasn't that good because I was selling, I was only selling half the lambs because I was keeping the ewe lambs, but obviously I'm expanding my business, so that would count. It's okay. They tend to become conspicuous if you file more than 5 consecutive years of losses. I think unless they're big losses on a sheep farm, they're probably not going to bother you, but could be wrong. For sales tax exemptions in New York State, at least, I can't speak for everywhere. There's a form. The form at the bottom is down at the bottom there. It's ST-125. And you can print those off, fill them out, take them to the stores that you use for your farm needs. And some of them just keep them on file, or one place gives you a number that you give them that they plug in when you come in and they make you tax exempt. Technically it needs to be signed and given to the business you're purchasing from. So print off some of those, take them to your feed store, take them to any of the businesses you're using for farming. It's nice not to pay sales tax on your ATV. And I have an ATV, or I had an ATV and I only used it for the farm, much to my husband's dismay, since he would have liked to ride it around. Sales tax exemptions in New York State, just mentioned, it needs to be signed and given to the business you're purchasing from. And you can only get a sales tax break on things you're using for the farm. And there's a whole list. It has to be a commercial, like in your case of horses, it needs to be a commercial horse boarding operation. And it gives you the descriptions for all those things. It's not that hard to figure out what you're using for the farm and what would be a logical farm expense. Financial planning, financial budgeting. So you're going to budget. I can't say I do a lot of planning ahead on the budget, but I've done it for a lot of years, so I have a pretty good idea what to expect. But those of you that are starting out or going to expand, it's a great time to budget. And I do have, I don't think I posted them, a bunch of spreadsheets that Kelsey did that are like a month-by-month cash flow, and you can put different headings in. And it's hard because when you sell lambs, you tend to sell them at a couple times during the year, and then you have no income the rest of the time, but you have expenses. So it's kind of interesting to see your cash flow over the year and try to plan for that. There's a spreadsheet at the sheep website, Cornell Sheep website, and I believe I did list that for people to look at. It's very complex, but I would recommend trying it. You have to really, when I get into it and playing around with it, I can really get a lot out of it. First, it seems a little bit daunting, but it's kind of fun to play with. You can change different, your death rate, your number of ewes, what you're feeding, the cost of your feeds. It's pretty flexible, and that there's a way to do it so that you can show buying your feed. It isn't necessarily obvious. I'd have to go back and look. So always evaluate changes to your business using sort of a cash flow, some sort of a cash flow budget. It can be a pencil and paper and a calculator, that's fine too. And remember that sometimes a period of losing money can lead to making money in the end, especially when you're expanding. So you might have less income and more expenses, but in the end, you might be more efficient and be able to make more money. And this is a plan for ending the business, and nobody wants to do this, but let's say you're doing a partnership agreement. You always want to make sure there's something in there. At least think about it. It's more important than you think. I mean, it should be in your will what happens to the animals. For example, if somebody passes away or gets a divorce or gets another job. And it's a good idea to at least think about, are you going to liquidate the flock? Are you going to downsize? How are you going to do that? What would happen if, this made me think about this, seeing the things on TV right now. What if you didn't have power for a week? What would you do? How could you function? So you might want to go through some of those scenarios in your mind, like how would you get water to your animals, and what would you do if the weather was really bad? And it's hard. During the ice storm, we had to slide buckets of water across the ice, and we had to slide gas cans across the ice and fill up the tractor that was running the generator that also ran the gas pump. So it can be very challenging. So while you don't want to necessarily do an end plan for the business, you do want to think about what would happen if there was either a disaster or you didn't like it after 5 years and you wanted to get out, and different people have money invested. And then you've pretty much got an action plan now. What did you decide? What still needs to be decided? There'll be some things that you change as you go along, and you can make a list and prioritize it. So one of the things that always kept me from doing a business plan was I felt like I was changing my mind all the time, or like I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But if you can get something down on paper, it's okay if you're going to change it, especially now we have word processing, right? So you can go in there and change stuff or cross stuff out. And if you don't want to follow a big template, you can just take a yellow pad or a pad of paper, your pencil or pen, and do like bullet points under marketing and bullet points under who's going to do what, and write some stuff down. I mean, sometimes it took me a week to write our business plan, the two of us working together for our big farm. But you could do quite a bit in an evening if you just sat down and made some notes. And I think that's the end of that one. I got to find, whoops. I got to share again, excuse me. You can't see all this, but I'm clicking on all the different things, trying to find them. Okay. Slideshow from the beginning. Now we're switching to blue from red. Whoops, come on. There it goes. So now we're going to talk about the cost of producing lamb. And lamb, everybody's situation is going to be different. I'm going to show you an example using my farm because I know the real numbers, but it's a very small farm. It's only one way of doing it. I buy all my forages. There's lots of ways, and everybody's going to come out a little different, but I'm hoping I'm going to give you the principles so you know what you need to keep track of for expenses and income and that sort of thing. So trying to figure out what does it cost you to produce lambs? So you need to know all of your cash expenses. So you've got feed. So I buy my hay. So I've got hay, grain, minerals, milk replacer. Those are probably my biggest expense. Now, if you raise your own hay, remember it's not free, right? Just because you raised it. You didn't have to pay anybody else, but you probably bought supplies. You probably fixed the tractor. You made tractor payments. Might have fertilized. Might have had to pay some help to come and unload the hay wagon or put the hay in the barn for you. So remember, hay's not free. You should probably try to figure out what that cost you. Either put it under feed or under other categories. So pasture, you think, well, pasture's free. Well, you have fencing. You might be putting urea or some sort of fertilizer on. You might be renting pasture, maybe using your neighbor's pasture and paying them for the acreage or something. So there's some expense there. There's marketing costs, which we'll talk about a little more when we get to talking about the lambs that I sold to New Holland. but you have, even if you're selling direct, you're probably dropping the lambs off. You probably might be picking the stuff up. You might be going to the farmer's market. All those are expenses and should be counted. Supplies, supplies are like everything else you buy, buckets, that sort of thing. Vet meds, that's the money you spend on the vet, the money you spend on dewormer, the money you spend on vaccinating, the supplies for that sort of stuff. So that gives you an idea what your vet meds are. And you should have insurance of some kind. And lots of times they want to lump that in with your homeowners. I have a special package just for my farm because my father-in-law has our house insurance, and I couldn't kick him out of my house insurance deal. But you can get farm insurance, and you should have good liability insurance if you're selling products, like selling meat at the farmer's market, for example. So make sure you have insurance in there. Guardian animals, it does cost something to feed those beautiful Great Pyrenees. How about your land taxes? Are you going to attribute some of that to the farm? How about labor? All things to consider. You can also charge to the farm subscriptions to your farm magazines, donations you make as a business, that sort of thing. So there's quite a few things. But what are capital expenses? We talked about this a little bit under business planning. They're funds used by a company to acquire, upgrade, and maintain physical assets such as property, industrial buildings, or equipment. So capital expense is often used to undertake new projects, or investments by the firm or the farm for that matter. So if you're buying like 2 rolls of Electronet every year, that will probably go under supplies. When I expanded, I bought like 24 rolls of Electronet, and they let me depreciate that and count that as a capital investment. If you're buying any equipment, that's tractor, ATV, hay bine, all that stuff would be a capital expense. Breeding stock, if you're really expanding and buying breeding stock, that could be a capital expense. They don't depreciate that over many years, but it could be depreciated. And of course, buildings, they're sort of the classic capital expense. It might be even a fix-up of a remodel of an old building could probably be a capital expense as well. So I mentioned depreciation. That's an accounting method of allocating the cost of a tangible asset over its useful life. So businesses depreciate long-term assets for both tax and accounting purposes. So if I spend $100,000 on a barn, they're not going to take that out as an expense all in the first year. They're going to do it over 10 or 20 years. I'm not sure what buildings are now, but a lot of them are like, a lot of equipment is 5 years or 10 years, and buildings are a longer depreciation. And that just helps your taxes and your accounting make sense, because you still have that thing next year, right? It's just it was a big expense all at once. And then I'm going to talk about net worth just for a minute. That's what you own versus what you owe. So you have all your assets, that's all the things that belong to you, the sheep, the equipment, the buildings, the inventory. And then you have things that you owe, like maybe you took a mortgage to get the farm, or maybe you have a line of credit, or you have a loan on your tractor. So you take all those liabilities versus all the things you own, and you see how you're doing. And is your net worth growing, which is what you want to happen. Banks like to see net worth. And then how are you going to figure out what your cost of production is? And we're going to look at some actual costs in a minute. So you can use your Schedule F, which is basically looks like a little budget where you put all your expenses and income for the year. And then you can divide your expenses by the lambs sold or by the ewe. So you know what your expenses were per lamb or by the ewe. So you can sort of figure out how much it costs you to keep a ewe for the year. And there's also some good spreadsheets. And sorry that one is so hard to read. It's www.sheepandgoat.com/spreadsheets. That's the Maryland website that we are always talking about. They have a whole section of spreadsheets. And I'll show you an example of one of those in a few minutes. And we can use them to gather information. They'll do the math for you. The one below that is the one I was talking about at the Cornell site, the more complicated one. But like I say, that one's fun to play with if you're pretty good on spreadsheets. And then you can also use rules of thumb to help you estimate what your expenses are going to be, or what expenses were even. So this is my organizational method with only 20 some sheep, 25 or 30 sheep. I don't have that many receipts and checks and things. So I have a shoebox, and I put them in there, and then once or twice a year I sit down and add them all up. And if I need to know sooner, like if I'm looking to see how many bales of hay I bought last year, I can go back through and look at my receipts from the year before, which are now in a folder with the year listed on it. And you notice I took my bank statement or my bank checking book, sorry, and I put it has a dog sticker on it because our two checkbooks look exactly the same for the house and the farm, and it's easy to write a check out of the wrong one, which can cause you some problems. So this is a simple thing, but it works pretty well. So I'm not just showing you a picture of my messy family room, but right to the right is the door where you come in and out of the house and the entryway. And so I put the shoebox right there because then when I come in the door and the receipt is in my pocket, it doesn't end up in the washing machine. I can just toss it in the box, right? So make it someplace handy. Now our farm manager at Extension puts all his receipts in his visor, like he pushes his visor up and sticks them behind, which is great unless somebody jumps in the truck and pulls the visor down. Then you have receipts everywhere. So I would recommend a more secure place. It works for him, but it's kind of dangerous on the company car. I also have a spot where I put all the receipts in, and I have all my insurance stuff for the farm there, and a few things. All my farm catalogs are there, and lots of stuff. But at least the stuff I really need, I know where to find it. So keep all your receipts. Use a folder, a box, a pile. Just make sure the pile isn't in a windy spot. Make one specific spot where they're going to go. Then have a business checking account. Use Quicken or QuickBooks or an account book to summarize it all. Add it all up. I like to use Quicken because I know how to make like the pie charts and things on Quicken, and it's fun to look at those at the end of the year. And you may not feel like you have much information after a year, but after a couple of years, it's really interesting to look and see, like this year I did really well. Well, I didn't pay anybody to spread the manure that year. Or you can sort of get a good feel for where your big expenses are and what you might be able to do about them. You can also use that info to help you with pricing your product. If you have some control over your price, like if you're direct marketing, rather than the auction, for example, and you can say, well, I'm charging this much for my lamb because I know it cost me that much to raise it. So I mentioned rules of thumb before. So this is an example, 5 pounds of hay per day per ewe or lamb, 200 days for the ewes if you do a good job pasturing. This is going to vary by where you are, of course. Lambs, days on feed, I have to add feed for that about 75 days or even more this year because we couldn't get into the processor. Allow some more for waste. You can get prices off of Craigslist. So if you're trying to do budgeting, like say you're going to expand from 50 sheep to 150 and you need to figure out how much more hay you need, that's a pretty easy one because if you've been feeding 50, you can multiply, right? But you could also sort of estimate what you would need. So if you're making your own hay, figure out if you can make that much more and what it costs you to do that. Like, will it be cheaper because you're making more and you can use your equipment, same equipment, or are you going to have to upgrade or expand or get bigger equipment, I mean. So let's take a look at my 2019 income and expenses. I was hoping to have 2020, but it was sort of a weird year anyways. So we're going to stick to 2019. Here's the assumptions. I had 19 ewes that lambed. I had 2 ewe lambs that I didn't breed, so the rest of the flock is sort of carrying their expenses. And I had 2 rams actually had them for most of the year. I don't think he left till Christmas Eve, which was pretty much the end of the year. I had 35 lambs born, and they all survived. So I sold 26 through New Holland. I sold 4 as freezer lambs to my neighbors mostly, and I kept 5 as replacements. I still have those replacements, and they're going to lamb this spring, and I can't wait to see them. I'm really bad. I just want to keep more ewe lambs than I need. So let's look at what I had for income. So I had lamb sales. Some of those were culls. So what is a cull? Cull is a ewe that maybe had a bad udder, or it's a bad foot, or didn't raise her lambs, or is getting to be 10 or 11 years old and doesn't have any teeth. So it's a ewe that you're done with and you're going to sell to the market. You can also make them into sausage or whatever, but they're leaving your flock. So I sold, can't remember, probably 6 culls, 5 or 6 culls that year. And then I got $595. And I direct marketed 4 lambs for $150 a piece. And I sent market lambs to New Holland. I sent 26 to New Holland, but one of them, I also sold one, gave one actually to my neighbor for letting me pasture his land and for putting up with my barking dogs and for having to look at my manure pile all summer. So that was what I brought in, 2,771 from the auction. My total sales were 3,966 and 17 cents. So that's my total income. So we're going to ignore the 17 cents. I divided that by the 19 ewes, so I made $281 per ewe. Now we got to figure out what it costs us to keep those ewes. And if you divide it by the 35 lambs, that's about $133 income per lamb. So if you had 2 lambs per ewe, that'd be 266. Okay, so my expenses. That year I needed new boots. They were definitely for the farm, so I paid for those. My building supplies, lucked out and somebody fixed my sliding door, big sliding door in my barn for me and only charged me for the lumber and the hardware. And I don't have any crop expenses. Sometimes I do because I'll buy clover seed and overseed my pastures or something, but that year I did not have any. I did pay somebody to clean my barn. Gets it all done in a day. It's very expensive, but it's actually would cost me that much to rent a skid steer and do it myself. Farm supplies, 483. I could get my little pointer here, then maybe that would be smart. There we go, right here. And that's divided up by supplies, equipment, maybe fencing. Oh no, here's fencing stuff. So equipment's probably things like buckets or things you might use on the sheep, whereas supplies is probably something you're going to use up. Doesn't matter too much as long as you know what it is. And so my total, and here's my feed expenses, 4,187. So most of that's hay. That's 53 round bales at $60 each delivered. So I don't have a tractor, so he delivers them in a dump truck, which is great. He just dumps them out, and my neighbor comes with his tractor and lines them up for me. Puts a few in the barn, puts them out for the sheep to eat. It's a very convenient way to do it for somebody that has a full-time job, sometimes more than a full-time job. There's what I paid for minerals, my sheep mix, which mostly gets fed to the lambs, a little bit to the ewes, and whole corn. I do feed some whole corn when it's 20 below, just a little bit to the ewes. And sometimes when the pasture is really lush and green and they need a little bit of available energy to help them use that better. So there's my expenses. Oh, got some more here. Gloves. I didn't have anything under gloves this year. Under insurance, 382, and that should go down because I have less sheep and I do not have an ATV anymore. The pet food supplies for the cat, I'm sure I spent more than that. I probably didn't get it all on the right credit card. Sheep vet, okay, I did Yoni's testing. I had a farm call or two. Bought vaccines, dewormers, I know another thing that's under supplies is like ear tags and that sort of thing. So I separated out what I paid for vaccine. Wasn't very much. I don't have that many sheep anymore. $42.95, and the rest were various medicines and the actual vet costs for the vet. And sales tax. This is on the dog food for my large dogs, which I shouldn't have to pay. And you can actually get that money back from New York State by filling out a whole bunch of forms. I've never successfully done it, but it's supposed to be possible. A lot of the other farm things are tax exempt, but for some reason dog food, even though those are working dogs on my farm, I have to pay sales tax on that. And this is what it cost me to keep the 2 Great Pyrenees, but does not include their flea collars or their vet bill, which I must have just not put in as a farm expense. So my total expenses were $6,655. If you divide that by the 19 ewes, I have a $350 expense per ewe, and they are carrying the 2 rams and the 2 ewe lambs. And if you divide that by the lambs, the 35 lambs, it's $190 expenses per lamb. And what did I say I got for the lambs? Averaged 133. So it's not good in terms of my pocketbook. So income minus expenses, negative 2,689. So I'm not going to get rich selling lambs. Some years I can pretty much break even. I have made money when I had a bigger flock, and I had a little more cash to spend. So it varies from year to year, but the way I'm set up right now is not necessarily profitable. It does work good for me in this system. If I had more time to sell more lambs direct, I could make a little more per lamb, and that would help a lot. I did not include the money I give a local person who helps me. Well, I had a wrist operation. They helped me do chores and things for a few weeks. It doesn't include my land taxes, my utilities. You could use a percentage of your utilities towards your farm because you have electric fence. You might have fans going. The flea collars for the dogs or the vaccinations, or what I call the cash to the tractor guy who helps put my hay bales in. I also kept 5 ewe lambs that could have been sold for another $500 to $700. Obviously, that's not going to make up the difference of $2,600. And here, this is just reiterating. I had 35 total lambs. 26 went to New Holland. That left 9. 4 of those were freezer lambs. And then that left 5 for me to keep as replacements. So just to compare expenses, we had $350 expense per ewe and $281 income per ewe. So there's a difference, right, of basically $70. And I've talked to a couple of people that have big farms, like that's their main income, and their expenses per ewe are more like $110, which would be, and they have very productive sheep actually, so that would be a little more in the money-making line of things. Yeah, so if you look at the lambs, my expenses per lamb are about $190, and my income per lamb is $133, so about $60 difference there. And that's a lot to make up on a small farm. And I've looked at, okay, I can't really get bigger where I am because I have houses on each side of me. There is land around the neighborhood I could use, but with my schedule, I do not have time to do that. So what could I do to reduce the difference? Well, I looked at another year where I had 70 lambs, and I had about the same difference between expenses and income, but it was divided over more lambs. So instead of my expenses being 167% of my income, it was more like 132. So I was getting closer. Could I save $70 per ewe by changing my inputs and management? It would be hard in my current setup. Might be possible with more sheep maybe, where I could maybe afford to make a more efficient barn or something like that. And I can buy cheaper hay, but there's a lot of wastage on cheaper hay. I pay a lot for my hay, but it's 800-pound bales, and they feed like 800-pound bales. I don't throw much away, like you do maybe from a 30-pound round bale that's been sitting outside. Could I get more for each lamb? Well, there I could probably make a difference, because if I was doing more direct marketing and there was processing available, I can pretty much set my price. This year I did charge, instead of $150 per lamb, I charged $200 per lamb, which should get me up close to making money on the lambs. So this is just an example of a sheep enterprise budget, and this is, I think, the one from sheepandgoat.com. So you can see here, here's the number of head. I had 35 market lambs, 31 ewes, 4 cull ewes. This is when I had a few more sheep, so it's not the same as the original example. There's wool if you had wool to sell, price per unit over here. So here's the income from the different lambs and the cull ewes, and it adds up down here for the total, and it divides it up per ewe for you. Yes?
What's the initials LDP stand for?
Something
By
payment.
wool?
It's a allowance for the wool, but I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what that stands for. And I'm not sure that it still exists, to be honest with you.
And then another question was, is the wool price the price per pound of wool, or the pound of the sheep bearing the wool? That would be the pounds
the wool
of wool.
is per pound of wool, yep.
Yeah, okay.
So like our sheep have about 5 pounds of wool. They're not really a wool breed sheep, 5 to 6 pounds per fleece. So, yeah. Yeah, this is interesting because I'm not sure that still exists. That was a government payment. It had to do with the wool.
Loan deficiency payment.
There you go. Thanks.
I couldn't think of it
Googled
either. I had to look it up. I did Google it. I couldn't answer it for Kelly either, so there you go. I thought maybe you would know. Remember.
No, I just know what it is, but I didn't really know what it stood for either. Anyway, so the total expenses were $9,000 on this one, and you're going to be surprised because this is the same thing, only this has the expenses on the same page. For some reason, when I transposed it into the PowerPoint, it came in a whole different format there in the other one. So here's the costs. I had feed costs, ewe feed costs, lamb feed costs, veterinary costs. My total expenses were $12,000, so I was in the hole $3,000 still. But my expenses versus income was a little better, but still not on the plus side. And then you can play with these enterprise budgets. These are relatively simple ones, and you can try plugging in different things. They sometimes don't have exactly what you want for categories, and that can be a little frustrating, but you can play around with them and get some ideas. So when I mentioned that I sold lambs at New Holland, how did that go? What did I get for the lambs there? So they went on 2 different loads. The first time I sent 13, they went on September 30th. This is 2019. I got $1.65 a pound, which sounds a little low, but they averaged 75 pounds. And then they were $10 a head to truck. It's 8 hours from here to New Holland, by the way. 78 in commission. I think I figured that was $6 a head, and then $1 per head in yardage. That's the hay they supposedly feed them while they're there. And then there's the lamb checkoff, which helps promote lamb promotion and that sort of thing. So my gross check was $1,617, but my net was $1,387. That only nets out to $107 per lamb, and that's not going to make money. And it costs 14% of the gross for marketing, not counting shrink. So I always figure it costs me about 25 cents a pound for the marketing and the shrink. Shrink is Like I send 80-pound lambs when they get on the truck, and when they get sold at New Holland, they weigh 70 or 72 pounds, and that's the shrink. Their gut fill empties on the travel while they're traveling. They don't necessarily dive into the hay and water when they get there, and so your buyers actually like shrunk animals because they're getting more per pound for what they pay. And if they see animals that aren't shrunk, they'll actually drop the price sometimes. But there is a big expense to marketing that you should be aware of. So then I sent 12 more in October. They got a much better price per pound, but they weren't as big. So they were $2.10 a pound. They averaged 60 pounds. So I had 120 in trucking, $10 a piece, 72 in commission, and 12 in the yardage. So, and the lamb checkoff was only $4.97. My gross check was $14.91, and the net was $12.82. And guess what? I netted $107 per lamb. I will say this fall I did net more than that per lamb, close to $150 per lamb. Prices were quite a bit better. You don't really know until fall comes and you're sending lambs to the auction what you're going to get, but it's very interesting that I sent, this looks really encouraging, seeing $2.10 a pound versus $1.65 a pound, but in the end it all came down to about the same thing, and it was about the same amount, 14% of the gross for marketing. So if you can direct market, then you could get that 14% back, and you might be able to get a higher price besides, but it's a lot of work. So if we took our expenses and divided by the number of lambs, 6,655 divided by 35 lambs, it was 190 per lamb to break even. So that's all of the lambs, the ones I sold and the ones I kept. So I need to get like $200 per lamb to come out ahead. And that turns out to be, for most of these lambs I was selling then, that's $2.22 per pound live. This year my lambs were quite a bit bigger, and I still sold them for $200 a pound because I thought they were going to go sooner, and I actually quoted 150 or 175 to my people buying, so they were already in shock when I said 200, but they all paid it. So a 90-pound lamb is about 30 pounds of retail cuts, about a third. So I'm doing USDA processing here. I'm saying that I am. Processing was $94. You need to include your costs of dropping off and picking up if you're doing the dropping off. Usually you're doing the dropping off, and I try to get my customers to pick it up and pay the processing. But if you add that cost on, and don't forget things like advertising, labeling, your time, your car. So you have $200, right? That's what you got for the lamb, plus 94 for the processing is $294. Or if you can get cheaper processing, I had 200 plus 65 over there. So if you took your 30 pounds of retail cuts and you divided that into your total cost, you can see that you'd have to charge pretty close to $10 a pound in order to make back your money. Or if you can get a little cheaper processing, $8.80 a pound. Now, that sounds terrible, but usually what you do is you charge more for like the nice chops, the loin, and you charge a little less for ground lamb, although I find that's actually in big demand and I can charge a little more for that. So you can maybe average that price per pound. That's selling retail cuts. So it's kind of interesting to see what it would cost. And then if at one point this was quite a bit lower than what was in the grocery store, I've noticed lately that there's a company that's bringing in New Zealand lamb, and they're rarely selling anything for more than $9.99 a pound. And that's a little disturbing that they can bring lamb all the way from Australia and sell it and distribute it cheaper than I can make it in my backyard and eat it. So there's also what we call custom, and that means you're actually selling the lamb to the person before it goes to the slaughterhouse. I mean, you might not actually exchange money at that point, but the lamb goes to the slaughterhouse as their lamb. It does not have to be USDA processed. We have it could vary some by state. We have a custom, what we call a custom processor, and they can't resell that meat, and the owner can't resell that meat. It's for them. So you'd have to get $290 some for a lamb. But that includes the processing, or $147 for a half. So they'll let you split one, but you need to make sure you talk to the people so you know who's picking it up, who's dropping it off. There's usually a lot of phone calls and emails involved. And then when you're dropping stuff off, like say you're dropping the lambs off to the processor. In my case, the processor actually comes to my farm and harvests the lambs there. He actually shoots them in my barn, which is a little disturbing sometimes. But actually, when you think about it from the lamb's perspective, they never get handled or thrown on a trailer or driven down the road, which is probably pretty scary to them. It's more disturbing to me, I think. But I try to give him all the phone numbers and the number of like lamb number 192 goes to Dave Parker. And then I give him Dave Parker's phone number. And then I also, the day before, called Dave Parker and said, you need to call Joe, the butcher, for this, this is his number. And so there's a little bit of communication you need to do in there to make it work okay. Because there's nothing more frustrating to your butcher when they don't know, they can't get good cutting instructions. And there are quite a few good cut sheets online that you can find to use as an example. Like a lot of times you have people who have never bought a lamb for their freezer before, and they don't realize the lamb isn't totally made out of lamb chops. Right? So you need to make sure that they understand that there's shanks, and you can have a leg of lamb roast, and you can't have that and chops at the same time, right? You can do one or the other. So, well, one leg could be a lamb roast and one could be leg steaks, but you can't make the same thing out of the. You can't make both out of the same thing. So they usually need a little education, and I think somewhere in our resources we have posted my buying local meat handout. I hope we do. If not, I can put it in there. Might be under the first one.
Week.
Yeah. That has a lot of, gives an example like of how many lamb chops and how many leg steaks and how much space it takes in the freezer and that sort of thing.
One of the things, though, you might consider even on this is maybe having one or two choices for your customers to
That's
pick
true.
from. And that also is, especially given the challenges and constraints we have in all areas for processing. And it is time consuming for a processor then to have to go through all those steps of educating the consumer. So you can really help your processor and improve the relations by not giving people too many choices.
That's a great idea.
All of your lambs, they have choice A or choice B. A might have whole leg of lamb, whereas, B has, leg steaks.
Right. You might have one for grilling, like a grilling sample choice and a roasting choice or something. Couple options.
But that is definitely something to consider to keep your processors happy. So they'll allow you to have slots.
We all do anything we can do to keep our shearer happy and our processor. And remember, you need to plan way ahead to get processing. At least around here you do, and I think that's probably a problem in a lot of places in the country. I'm often asking for slots for my lambs before they're born, and that means checking with your customers or making a guesstimate of how many you're going to need, and that can be a challenge. And even then, like I fed 10 lambs until the end of January. Actually, it was the last day in January when the processor finally came to get the lambs. And that night I had one of my buyers or one of my customers call and say, well, I forgot to call you, but we really don't need that extra lamb. And I was like, it's too late. It's gone to the processor. And I made him take it. I said, you can give it to your brother. I'll buy some of it back to you to give to my tractor guy, whatever, but you can't back out at the last minute. And he's a friend of mine, so I could get away with that. But you do take a risk when you feed animals out for very specific people. sometimes you can find somebody to take it anyways, but you hope they tell you before the processor comes, not after. And in our case, our processor's nearby, and so it's not too hard to get them to go pick it up. It's not a real pretty place, so if you have some first-time customers, you maybe don't want to send them to the processor. Kind of depends on what your processing place looks like. Can be kind of scary. This guy tends to have like a barrel of cow heads sitting out in front, something like that. That can be disturbing to people that aren't used to that sort of thing. So think about that also when you're deciding who's going to pick it up and drop it off.
You could also consider asking for a deposit. I would do that a lot of times with new buyers, at least a deposit to cover the processing. So you're not out that part if they do back out, and your processor gets paid. So back to keeping the processor happy. They want to get paid. They want that lamb gone because they don't have a lot of extra freezer space, and at least you're not out the cash to pay them then if cash flow is a challenge.
I usually hear about it if somebody doesn't pick up their lamb because, like you say, they have only so much room in their freezer to keep everybody's stuff separate, and they like it to be there. So remember that time and money are usually one versus the other, right? If you put in more time, you can control the price. If you have a job where you work 50 hours a week, it might be really hard to do a lot of direct marketing, unless you have a lot of people at your job that would like to buy lamb. That might make it easier, but it does tend to be more time consuming. If you only have a couple lambs to sell, that's not a problem. If you have 500 lambs to sell, you want to think of maybe a couple of different ways to market your lambs. You may or may not choose money making as your most important goal. That might not be why you're in the business, or it might be one of the reasons, but not necessarily the most important one. It's okay. You're allowed to have sheep as I don't want to call it a hobby because I'm definitely trying to make money, but I figure there's all these people that spend a lot of money on other things that don't seem nearly as productive to me. Maybe that's very shallow of me, maybe, because they probably enjoy what they're doing also, but it isn't necessarily my most important goal. And remember, there's a lot of different marketing channels for lamb. You can direct market, you can do the auction, they can sell them at all different sizes. You may find in your area it's more efficient to sell 50-pound lambs and get more per pound than it is to raise them to 120 pounds and sell them for freezer lamb. Kind of depends on your market and where you are, and maybe you're going to do all of those things. Remember, if you're just starting out, it takes quite a few years to figure out your farm, your pasture, your markets, to build a customer base, to get good at what you're doing. Don't expect everything to just fall into place the first year necessarily. Every year you'll learn something and you'll improve. So how big do you need to be? And this is sort of based on the Northeast, and that kind of depends what you're trying to do. So I've had a 75 to 100 ewe flock. It's very manageable. That means you got 100 to 175 lambs to sell. It's quite a few to market. It's definitely not enough to live on. So it's probably going to be part of another farm enterprise, or you're going to have a job off the farm. 300 or 400 ewes, I heard Kathleen Harris say that's just a nice family farm size. They have 600 or 700 ewes or lambs to market. You're almost to the size of my friend Bruce Vermeulen, who had a lot of sheep over the years. He said he needed to have 400 ewes in order to afford a tractor. So that's going to vary a lot by farm, but that give you a little guideline. So he did that as his main income. I believe his wife worked off the farm to provide a little more income without expenses, with less expenses than sheep. 1,000 ewes, you're talking 1,500 to 2,000 lambs to market per year. So when you have big loads of lambs, you can sometimes control your market a little more. Even when I had 250 sheep and marketed, 300 or 400 lambs, was nice to be able to make a load of 100 lambs, because sometimes I could find a buyer that would, so they didn't have to go to the auction. So if you have big groups of lambs to sell, you can make loads of consistent size. You can try to hit some specialty markets. When I say specialty, there's labs that buy sheep and lambs and all kinds of things you would never think of, specialty markets. 4,000 ewes. I do have a friend with 4,000 or 5,000 ewes. He markets a lot of lambs. I don't know how he ever keeps track of everything, to be honest with you. But that's pretty much all he does. He doesn't do a lot of, he does shear, a lot of sheep to shear, but he spends most of his time marketing and doing the business end of things. He does have special markets. He does have great efficiencies of size. He has big, beautiful open barns. You can drive down the middle and feed. He has income year round because he lambs out of season. And he spends his time marketing and has other people that actually clean out the waters and push up the feed and keep an eye on the sheep. So there's advantages to all the different sizes depending on what your situation is and what you're trying to do. That's just my contact information. There's some more good resources at ATRA. We're actually done early here, people. At the Maryland website and at Cornell. And there's other good ones out there, but those are the ones I probably use the most. I'm sorry, they're hard to read. I tried to change the color on those, but they wouldn't change. So I want to also tell you that in your resources this week, I do have one other little PowerPoint I want to give you, but I did record the housing and handling video so that you can get a little look at some different types of housing and also some handling ideas for your sheep, because we didn't really talk about that.
Did mention that in the notice this morning. Olivia did have one question. So is there anything you might say about working with wholesale customers buying whole lambs? So I don't know, Olivia, you're talking buying whole carcasses, or are you talking about buying the lambs on the hoof? I guess either way, you know, it starts with understanding your cost of production and know what you need to get, but you might be, you could certainly take a little less because you're going to spend less time marketing if you're moving the whole load.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if that addresses your question. So feel free to add if there's more to that. There was a few questions on trucking and things. So yeah, if you hire somebody to transport your animals, those truckers will get a fee, and usually the professional ones that'll be on the ticket when they drop them off at the sale barn, and they'll just take that commission out directly and pay the trucker. But they just pick up the sheep at your place, drop them off at the sale barn. Once they're at the sale barn, then the sale barn staff handles them through the sale until they get marketed.
Yeah, and when I get the check, the trucking's already taken out in the commission. You know, it's marked on the check, so it tells you, you know, the trucker got this much and the commission was this much and the yardage.
So Kelly, your question on wool, I'm not aware of a separate wholesale market for organic wool. Betsy, are you? I mean, if you're selling it to a specialty or hand spinner or something like that, you certainly could get more per pound.
Yeah, I think there is maybe a demand for it, but I don't know of a wholesale market for it unless there's a company that's, you know, selling organic wool hats or something and wants to buy it. It might depend a little bit on the type of sheep you have and that sort of thing. I don't know much about what the organic wool requirements are either.
As far as budget resources for wool production, I think what you know, obviously you'll have some additional expenses if you have to shear animals. Of course, you might have to shear animals whether or not you're producing a saleable wool product or not. But then, of course, that is also an income. So you could add those to for your particular enterprise.
That's right. I did not have shearing in my budget because I have hair sheep. I didn't even think about that. But for our extension farm, we would have had a shearing. It's quite a bit too.
Okay. I think we caught up on the questions.
Okay. I can't see the chat when I have my PowerPoint up, so.
No worries. So you just need to put that in show mode, I guess,
Yeah, I'm getting there.
if you're all set.
Of course, it's covering, the thing is covering it at the moment.
Oh, you can't see your top. There you go.
I don't know what it
There
just
you go.
did.
It shifted it on the.
Ah, there we go.
There you go.
That look right? Yeah. So,
Yes, it does.
thinking back about throwing all this information at you guys over 6 weeks and, hoping you get what you can out of the homework and the forums. And you guys have been great in the forums. I still have some questions to go back and address, and I will do that. I just had sort of a weird, crazy week with the sheep deciding that from when the ram got out last fall. And I didn't get to some of those, but I do want to answer some of those. You guys asked a lot of good questions, and I hope you learned some things from each other as well. And I just wanted to sort of sum up some things that I hope you got out of the course. I think we said them. I tried to say some of these things a couple times, but it's really important to maximize your forage intake or your dry matter intake on your sheep by having good quality forage, making sure there's bunk space, feeders they can reach, that's available all the time. If you may be feeding them more than once or twice a day, whatever you need to do to encourage them to eat the forage. And I think that'll also help with your income. Sheep need good ventilation. You don't need to shut them in a big building or a small building. You want to make sure if you're going to shut the doors that they've got curtains open on each side or something along that line. They need fresh air, and that'll save you a lot of pneumonia and health problems with your sheep. Try to plan when you're going to lamb or kid. Think about keeping your ram under control, how you're going to do that. You're going to plan your lambing depending on your market, your resources, and don't forget your family obligations. So plan your lambing. Try to be flexible. We mentioned having a plan B and a plan C. Sometimes you just need to take a deep breath and try something another way or make an adjustment. And like I said, I think I have the same basic plan, but I try something different every year. Don't forget basics like water, minerals, and a clean place for the sheep to lie down. Sometimes attention to those basic things and good feed can make a lot of other things go right. So keep your sheep in the right body condition. Fat sheep don't do well, thin sheep don't do well. Trying to keep them in the right body condition helps solve a lot of other problems. And if you're looking and you're in the market to buy animals, try to buy them from a place that manages their sheep the way you want to manage yours. So if you're going to have a pasture operation, you don't necessarily want to buy somebody's sheep that have been in confinement. If you want to do showing, you want to buy your sheep from a person that shows sheep. If you are going to sell hothouse lambs, primarily try to buy your stock from somebody that successfully sells hothouse lambs. So there's a lot of selection that happens sort of naturally on a sheep farm over the years. So you can take advantage of that by purchasing ones that are already set up and ready to go for your system, at least the system you think you're going to start with, right? And choose your ram wisely because they're going to have a big effect on your flock, especially if you're expanding or keeping your ewe lambs. Think about that. You don't necessarily want the one that's going to make the best market lambs. You might want the one that's going to make the best ewe mothers for your sheep or for your flock in the long run. So think about what you're purchasing your ram for and go with that. Try to maximize your resources. If you've got land, you got different people working with you or in your family. Do you have buildings? They don't have to necessarily be sheep buildings because sheep are pretty flexible. Do you have capital? Maximize all that stuff, but don't get carried away. Sketch out a business plan. Even if you have the animals for fun, you can sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil or pen, or maybe you want to do it in Word, whatever you're most comfortable with, and make a little few bullet points about you're still going to have lambs to market, and you're still buying feed. And I hate when I have somebody call me up and say, how do I get rid of these lambs? Because you shouldn't be getting rid of them. You should be marketing them. So sketch out a little business plan. Think about some of those things ahead of time. And then last but not least, see if you can find a veterinarian that you'd like to work with. Invite him or her to your farm, preferably when it's not an emergency, so that when you do have an emergency, they can help you. So those are my words of wisdom. I don't know, maybe Lynn has some to add as well.
Well, I think you covered a lot of details. We covered a lot in the 6 weeks. I'll just remind folks that you do have access, continued access to Teachable. We will be, you'll have access to the forums to comment to the forum in the forums through March 8th. So we encourage you, if you've missed some of those opportunities, go back and look or share ideas with classmates or put in your own responses to the forums, and we'll track it for another week or so. Also, there is a post-course survey, so we really would appreciate if you can take a few minutes to fill that out. And course completion certificates, if you would like a certificate, just let me know. Actually, if you clicked through the course and completed sections and use the arrow bar on the top, Teachable creates a certificate, but I also have one that I do specifically for the courses that we work with. So that's what I have.
I know somebody asked about how to keep the stuff. You can always download the PDFs and put them all in a folder in your computer or Dropbox. If you save the links for the videos, you could even copy and paste them all into a Word document. If you're worried you're not going to get back into Teachable, or if you're like me and you can't remember how to get back into Teachable sometimes, those will probably work for a long time. I don't know how long those videos are posted before they take down ones that aren't looked at or whatever, but
well, we do try to update them every year before the live class. Sometimes links, if an entity changes or updates their website, you may find a link doesn't work. So we try to keep, if we've got the title and information, but yeah, certainly any of the PDFs, a lot of times that's the best way, is to download them and kind of file them on your computer. They don't take as much resources as the video links would.
I have a Dropbox folder of goat and sheep stuff.
And again, you'll be actually welcome to join us for the next year's class too. So
I know we
that's
had
one
some
of the
people
advantages
this year
of being involved in Teachable. So yes, we did.
That's great. Well, folks, I can't believe we finished early, but that's a first. I really enjoyed teaching this year.
No computer glitches this year, Betsy. So that does help.
That made a big difference.
Last year, every week we had something challenge with technology. So
just drove me crazy.
I have to say, all in all, technology was a plus. I can say it now because I don't have to knock on wood.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And again, if any of you have, you can contact me after the class if you have questions, and it might take me a few days to answer, but I will be happy to answer questions you have or direct you to, some good resources for what you're looking for. And we do have, I know Cornell has a small ruminant management. It's called Sheep Goat Management L, and you can get on that list. And whenever anybody posts something, it comes out on the list. Like somebody might ask a question or say, has anybody tried? There's one right now. Has anybody tried the oral selenium gel? And then people get on and comment. And also the professors from Cornell get on and comment. So you can get on that. You can subscribe to that by going to the Cornell Sheep site, which I think is listed up in the very beginning of your general resources.
Yes.
And there's a spot there where you click to subscribe and follow the directions, because that's a great place to bounce ideas around too.
That is also in another reminding me that there is a place to for the listserv for the Small Farms program. So if this is your first course, that also is in the tail end of the class in Teachable, with ways to connect or stay connected through the Small Farms program. And Betsy had shared before, the Facebook page specifically for this class, which hasn't been super active, but if we get more people in there, we might see more activity.
Right, and I did want to give credit to Erica Frenay, who works at Cornell and does run the Small Farms program and somehow keeps all of these online classes going and straight and keeps all of us in line and reminds us to, get the survey out and do all the things we need to do to make it all work. So she deserves a lot of credit as well. Great. Well, thank you all. It was great getting to know you. And like I said, when I retire, I might be coming to visit everybody. So watch out. I'll bring Lynn with me too.
I'm ready for a road trip. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Good night, Bets.
Good night.